Akasha is the main character I build around in Revived Witch. Here's how I've made her work in Endgame PvP on Global Server. If you're an Akasha player too, and you haven't watched my first Akasha PvP guide, I'd recommend checking that out first though, because I don't want to waste your time by being repetitive with the advice I give. First, as a general PvP tip, switch the defense type of your gear based on whether the main DPS of the opposing team does either physical damage or magic damage. For example, if you're fighting an Ella in PvP, the strongest AoE physical DPS, you want your team to be decked out in physical defense gear. If you're fighting an Ushbio, one of the best AoE magical DPS, you want your team to have magic defense gear. Two possible situations where maybe you wouldn't want to do this would be if A, you have gear that's especially strong, like maxed out rainbow gear with really strong substats, or if B, you have a defense shred character and their defense shred scales off of a specific defense type. For example, when using Avel, Cetus, or Caledonia, you probably want to stick with physical defense gear on them, even if you're going up against a team that primarily deals magic damage, especially if you're running a multi-hit physical DPS like Akasha. This is because increasing your physical defense to make your physical defense shred from these characters stronger is so incredibly valuable. So in a practical situation, if I'm running say Akasha, Synedia, and Cetus for example as my team, if I'm fighting a really strong Ushbia, I'd probably run magic defense gear on my Akasha, magic defense gear on my Synedia, but physical defense gear on my Cetus. But if I'm fighting an Ella, I just run physical defense gear on everyone. Moving on, here's some information specifically related to rolling gear substats in Revived Witch, since having strong gear is unsurprisingly really important in PvP. Credit goes to Reddit users QDVF and Virtual2439 for this information. You can just pause the video if you want to read what they wrote here. I'll also include links to their posts in the description. The Google Doc that QDVF made in particular has a ridiculous amount of information in it for Revived Witch, so consider checking that out if that sounds interesting to you. Okay, let's finally get into Akasha specific advice. If you play Akasha, Caledonia is in the Golden Feather shop right now, and I highly recommend getting Caledonia if you're struggling in PvP. For most situations I've encountered, the standard team I discussed in my previous Akasha PvP video, consisting of Akasha, Synedia, and Cetus, is strong enough to beat most PvP teams. However, there is one major exception to this, and that's when fighting Ellas with insanely stacked, maxed out rainbow gear. Usually, normal Ellas with purple gear are pretty beatable using Cetus as your guardian. However, these rainbow gear Ellas are a different story. Oftentimes, my Akasha and Synedia get completely deleted before I can even leave a dent in these monstrous Ellas. This is especially true if the Ella is protected by other tanky characters like Ella-Afallen-Tuonel. And unfortunately, Cetus provides no AoE damage mitigation for Akasha and Synedia. For these whale Ellas in particular, Caledonia is really useful for keeping your Akasha and Synedia alive, because Caledonia can actually mitigate AoE damage and passively heal, unlike Cetus. That's extremely useful against Ella, the premier AoE physical DPS character. However, if you don't really care about PvP as an Akasha player, which is completely fine, or you just want another character that could potentially appear in the Golden Feather shop in the future, and you want them much more than Caledonia, then I don't think you should try to get Caledonia. You should follow your own personal priorities, and PvP isn't everything, after all. With Caledonia, in addition to having a defense shred chaos skill like Cetus and Abel do, she also has a charge skill that provides AoE damage mitigation and healing. It's significant that Caledonia can do this through a charge skill, not a normal or chaos skill, because it means Caledonia's charge skill can be triggered passively without interfering with Akasha's own skill usage. Furthermore, because Akasha's normal skill only has a 1 bar cost, it triggers Caledonia's charge skill very quickly. So on an Akasha team, Caledonia is especially good at mitigating AoE damage. As you'd expect, the team I currently use right now in Endgame PvP is Akasha, Synedia, and Caledonia. Besides the advice I mentioned in my previous Akasha PvP guide, since this new team does play very similarly to the old variation of this team I was using with Cetus, here are 2 new tips I have specifically for playing an Akasha, Synedia, and Caledonia team. First, here's how I recommend playing aggressively with this team. If your order energy bar builds up too much, and you want to burn your order energy so you can use Akasha and Caledonia's chaos skills faster, rapidly alternating between Akasha and Synedia's normal skills will allow you to do that until your order energy bar runs out. To play aggressively, use Caledonia's Chaos skill once for the 10-second long defense shred, and then for the next 10 seconds, switch to using Akasha's Chaos skill to take advantage of that defense shred. A situation I'd pretty much always recommend playing aggressively in is once you're in energy outbreak mode, after you've built up 5 soul marks. Second, here's how I recommend playing defensively with this team. If your order energy bar is low, but you need to keep Caledonia's charge skill effect up for the AoE damage mitigation and heals in order to survive your opponent's AoE attacks, then stick exclusively to using Akasha's normal skill and Caledonia's Chaos skill. If you have excess order or Chaos energy bar, or you just don't care about having AoE defenses, then you can use Akasha's Chaos skill for the damage and Synetia's normal skill to build Chaos energy faster. But when you need enough AoE defense to survive your opponent's attacks, you need to trigger actions as quickly as possible so that Caledonia and Synetia's charge skills refresh quickly enough. Caledonia's charge skill buff only lasts for 5 seconds, so if you aren't taking actions quickly enough, the buff from it will wear off, which can lead to your Akasha or Synetia getting one-shot by super strong instances of AoE damage, like from a critical hit from Ella, for example. Because Synetia's normal skill is 2 bars versus Akasha's 1 bar normal skill, trying to use Synetia's normal skill, which is a heal when your order energy bar is low, can ironically get you killed. Doing this reduces the number of actions you're taking over time enough that Caledonia's charge skill won't trigger in time before Ella's fire breaths will roast you to a crisp. The most relevant situation where playing defensively would be useful is when you're fighting against what I consider the premier meta team in PvP, Ella-Afallen-Tuonel and Ella. This is especially true if that team has top tier rainbow gear equipped. If you're fighting this team, once Ella transforms, if that Ella is well built, you should probably start playing defensively or you're going to get deleted. You're probably in for a long, drawn-out fight if you're fighting this specific team. Afallen makes her team invincible and absorbs her team's damage. Tuonel provides AoE shields and heals. Ella herself has insane defense and health regeneration. When you're fighting against this team, you need to constantly keep Caledonia's charge skill effect up once Ella transforms if you want to survive a fight, with the already self-regenerating Ella being protected even further by Afallen's 2-second invincible pillow and Tuonel's AoE shields. In PvP, the longer a fight draws out, the weaker the healing on both teams become. So, if you're fighting an Afallen-Tuonel Ella team, and you can't kill any of their team members before Ella transforms, the game plan is to just survive Ella's onslaught long enough for the opposing team's heals to become weak enough that you can finally shred right through their fortress-like defenses. So when you're fighting against this premier meta PvP team, decked out in the best gear, if Ella transforms into a dragon because you weren't able to kill her quickly enough, you'll start by playing defensively until enough time passes that heals weaken. You bide your time patiently, and then when the opportunity presents itself, you switch to playing more aggressively to try to burst them down. Alright, as I did in my previous Akasha PvP video, let's do some PvP battle demonstrations, to prove this team actually works well against these endgame super meta teams. I've handpicked the most difficult PvP matches I could find for you guys to prove this team and strategy is effective. So without further ado, let's do it.